Has nothing changed in your life and yet suddenly you feel on edge, restless, or you're mentally spiraling right before your period? A lot of us know this is related to hormones, and yet when it happens, it still feels unpredictable and out of your control. In reality, there are very specific shifts happening in your brain chemistry during this time. Once you understand those shifts, this anxiety spike stops feeling like it's coming out of nowhere. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 3 biological drivers of late luteal anxiety, and then the nutrition and lifestyle habits that can either stabilize this phase and make it far more manageable, or unintentionally make it more intense. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a clinical nutritionist, and one of the things I care most about is helping women understand what's actually happening in their brains and in their bodies. Because when you don't understand, or more importantly, resonate with the why behind certain nutrition or lifestyle strategies, it all just feels kind of vague. And when something feels vague, it's harder to stick with, even if you know it's good for you. So first, we're going to walk through the 3 biological drivers of late luteal anxiety, specifically for those of you who notice your anxiety ramping up during PMS. And then we're going to talk about the most important nutrition and lifestyle factors that can support this anxiety etiology or accidentally make that anxiety a lot worse. So let's get into the first biological driver of late luteal anxiety, which is estrogen. Estrogen has one of the most direct impacts on serotonin production and signaling in the brain. There are 3 main ways it does this. First, estrogen increases the activity of an enzyme called tryptophan hydroxylase, which is an enzyme involved in serotonin synthesis. So higher estrogen can mean more serotonin production. Second, estrogen increases serotonin receptor density and sensitivity. That means that when serotonin binds to its receptor, the signal is stronger and more effective. And third, estrogen reduces the activity of an enzyme called MAO, which is responsible for breaking down serotonin. So when MAO activity is lower, serotonin sticks around longer. What this breaks down to is when estrogen is higher, which typically happens around ovulation, serotonin signaling is more supported. So this is the time where many women notice they feel more social, more confident, or just more emotionally steady. As you move into the luteal phase, estrogen gradually declines, and the late luteal phase right before your period is where there's the most noticeable drop. When that drop happens, serotonin support can drop with it. And while serotonin is often labeled as the happy neurotransmitter, it's also deeply involved in feelings of calm, safety, and emotional stability. So when serotonin tone dips, it can translate into more anxious thoughts, more rumination, and feeling less at ease in your own mind. All right, let's talk about biological driver number 2, which is progesterone and GABA. Progesterone is probably the hormone most associated with anxiety because it has a very strong influence on the neurotransmitter GABA. GABA is essentially the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. It helps you feel grounded, physically relaxed, and less reactive to stress. Progesterone itself doesn't directly calm the brain, but it converts into a metabolite called allopregnenolone. Allopregnenolone enhances GABA receptor activity, which in simple terms means that it makes GABA work more effectively. So during the mid-luteal phase, when progesterone is higher, many women actually feel calmer, they sleep better, and they feel more steady overall. But there are 2 main ways the system can contribute to anxiety. The first is low progesterone. If someone is progesterone deficient, They may not be getting enough of that GABA support during the luteal phase at all. That can translate into feeling wired, restless, or anxious throughout the second half of the cycle. The second and very common scenario is sensitivity to the progesterone shift itself. In the late luteal phase, similar to what we just discussed with estrogen, progesterone also drops. When progesterone drops, allopregnenolone drops with it. That means that GABA support drops quickly as we're waiting for our period to start. For women, especially those who are more sensitive to these fluctuations, that withdrawal can feel like a sudden increase in anxiety, irritability, restlessness, or even physical symptoms like muscle tension or racing heart. So progesterone isn't bad for most women, it's very, very good. But changes in progesterone can basically destabilize the calming system in the brain. And when GABA support decreases, anxiety does tend to rise. Okay, the third biological driver of late luteal anxiety is increased stress reactivity. This is where a lot of women feel confused because nothing in their external life has necessarily changed, but internally, your stress system buffering system has. Estrogen helps modulate the HPA axis, which is your central stress response system. Progesterone, through its impact on GABA, also helps you buffer your response to stress. So in the late luteal phase, when both of these decline that we just talked about, the systems that help you regulate stress are less supported. So your life may not externally seem more stressful, but your threshold for stress is lower. So that same email, the same conversation, the same to-do list can feel more overwhelming than it did 2 weeks earlier. And if additional stress is layered on during that window, it can amplify anxiety even further. When resilience drops, anxiety rises more easily. So if you've listened to all of this, you might be thinking, okay, if these hormonal shifts happen naturally every month, does that mean I'm just stuck with this? Not exactly. Because while you cannot stop estrogen and progesterone from fluctuating if you're following a natural cycle, you can influence how resilient your brain is during that window. Sometimes we're unintentionally doing things that makes this window more reactive. So today I want to go over the top 3 areas that I have women pay more attention to and optimize if they struggle with luteal anxiety. So let's talk about amplifier number 1. The first factor that can significantly amplify late luteal anxiety is undereating. Did you know that women actually have increased energy needs in the second half of their cycle? Your resting metabolic rate tends to increase in the luteal phase, and there's research suggesting that we may utilize certain nutrients like magnesium more quickly during this window. So while your brain is already navigating lower serotonin support and shifting GABA signaling, your body may actually require more calories and more nutrients, not less. But a lot of women are unintentionally undereating. Maybe you're trying to lose weight. Maybe you're just really busy. Maybe you're just not that hungry earlier in your cycle, and the pattern carries over. If you're not getting enough overall energy, enough protein to support amino acid production, enough micronutrients, your body perceives that as stress. And remember, your stress threshold is already lower during this phase. So underfueling layers additional physiological stress on top of an already sensitive system. Sometimes the most stabilizing thing you can do during the late luteal phase is actually eat more consistently and eat enough. Not perfectly, just adequately. And when you're properly fueled, you're also less likely to rely on foods or substances like caffeine and sugar to compensate for low energy, but further trigger anxiety. Okay, so amplifier number 2. The next factor that ties directly into this is blood sugar stability. I always tell people that blood sugar instability is one of the most common drivers of mood swings that gets completely overlooked. Because when your blood sugar drops too low, your body just doesn't feel a little hungry. It perceives that drop as a pretty significant stressor. In response, it releases stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol to basically bring your blood sugar back up. And the physical symptoms of that response can feel exactly like anxiety: racing heart, shakiness, irritability, feeling on edge or wired. So during a phase of your cycle where your stress threshold is already lower, blood sugar swings hit even harder. So the second most stabilizing thing you can do during the luteal phase is prioritize consistent, balanced meals in addition to eating enough overall. Okay, amplifier number 3 is tricky because it's about exercise, and exercise can absolutely reduce anxiety in the short term. If you're feeling really wired, for example, going for a hard workout can relieve that almost immediately. But the issue isn't the short-term relief component. The issue is what repeated high-stress training does during a phase where stress buffering capacity, once again, is already reduced. In the late luteal phase, when you have less modulation of the HPA axis and less GABA buffering, the same workout that felt fine 2 weeks earlier can now produce higher perceived exertion, a greater cortisol response, slower parasympathetic recovery, and more blood sugar variability afterwards. If underfueling is also present, glycogen stores are also lower. Cortisol can stay elevated longer, adrenaline compensates more aggressively, and anxiety symptoms increase. That is the loop: reduced buffering, higher stress load, slower recovery, heightened reactivity. I'm not saying that you shouldn't exercise. It just means that during this window, your body may respond differently to the same input. Even more so, if you throw all 3 of these scenarios together, underfueling, blood sugar instability, and overtraining, you create what I would call the late luteal anxiety perfect storm. On the other hand, when you're fueling consistently, stabilizing your blood sugar, and being intentional about how you train during this phase, you can significantly soften the intensity of what might otherwise feel overwhelming. Speaking of anxiety and stabilizing your blood sugar, I have an amazing video where I walk you through making the best breakfasts for anxiety. So check out that video right up here, and hopefully I'll see you in that one.